All right, once again, the Essential Boys are back, and I'm here with Dan Halperin, my man Dan from New York. What's up, Dan?
Hey guys, what's going on? Good to see you.
All right, so last time we talked about Star Trek and our love of Star Trek. As you can see, we're old and we're into retro. But so we figured we're going to even go older than that and start with something that near and dear to both our hearts, and that is the Twilight Zone.
Yep.
All right, so Dan, I mean, even though I know it's old, but tell us about the history of Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, so Rod Serling had, by the mid-50s, had become a very successful television writer. He was actually probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous writer back then in the golden age of television. I think he had done a couple of...
I think he did Playhouse 90s.
Playhouse 90s. He did a script called Requiem for a Heavyweight, which I believe was made into a feature film.
Yes,
and I think he did it. And I think he did another script called Patterns. I'm not sure. But he was born in Ithaca, New York, and I think either Ithaca or Syracuse. Somebody's going to probably chime in and correct me. But in the 1920s, and he served in World War II, which definitely sort of shaped his whole outlook of his future scripts, which you could talk.
You saw a lot of horror there. Yeah.
A lot of horror, and you can sort of see a lot of the themes of what he experienced in World War II spread throughout a lot of his scripts, in the Twilight Zone. And then he wanted to pitch a anthology series addressing a lot of social issues of the day, the civil rights movement, nuclear war, other pressing issues. But he felt that what I read up about, that if you did it in the context of like science fiction, fantasy, and horror stories, that you could get away with a lot more. You could sort of slip the messages in without being preachy, because they become parables,
Yeah, I mean, because at the time, we're talking about the mid-50s and stuff like that. You had Tales of Tomorrow, science fiction theater, those kind of shows. So it wasn't like too off the wall to come up with an anthology series of this bent. But he did thought, like, even though they were going into more like Dimension X and all of this kind of stuff, he was bringing it more closer to home. So, like, his anthologies will have twists, wouldn't they? And the twist could either be science or it could be, just personal, like Monsters on Maple Street. So, like, but again, still having a science element. So, so it had 5 seasons. And we were going to talk about later about the fourth. You think you said the 4th season went to 1-hour episodes and everything, which was weird at the time for syndication and stuff like that. But most people probably would have seen the first 3 seasons religiously, because ever since the 50s, it hasn't really stopped playing, has it?
No, it hasn't played. Yeah,
it's always playing somewhere.
It's interesting too, though. Like, so when you there was an initial sort of pilot episode that was done in 1958, which I haven't seen, but I've found it on YouTube. It's available.
Really?
It was done. I think it was actually done on, I think, Westinghouse Theater, and it presents Desi Liu. So that episode actually was introduced by Desi Arnaz.
Well, I think Desi Liu Productions, I think I read that they had a lot of dealings with the early period of Twilight Zone, didn't they?
I don't know if they did, because I think that Rod Serling's company, actually Cayuga, produced it itself. But this was a pilot that was for, I think, the Desi Liu Playhouse. So Desi Arnaz introduces it, and I think it stars William Bendix and Martin Balson's in it, and it was an hour long show. That was, I guess today you would call a backdoor pilot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it was called the Time something or other.
The Time Elements.
The Time Elements. Yeah. And then eventually it got, he retooled the title to call it the Twilight Zone. The interesting thing about the first season is that the original, if you look at the first season, the do is not in the first season. It's a different score. Go back and listen to it.
Oh, wow.
It's a kind of like that kind of strange ethereal score by Bernard Herrmann. and then they dumped it and they went to the do 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 that was done by a composer I'd never even heard before. I've never heard of before when I did the research on theme, and that's very unusual. It's very unusual for a series to sort of completely, change, retool the score, the opening theme, but also if you look at the opening graphic, it's totally different. The interesting thing for me, from like a memory point of view and nothing else, but like since I've been watching this since a kid, I think that I probably during a Twilight Zone marathon one summer out in the country, I saw a lot of the first episodes, right? So when I see that first season opening nowadays, I just think of like that time when I was a kid out in the country watching that one night. You know what I mean? Because it was probably the first time I'd ever seen those episodes. But yeah, so it ran over 150 episodes. I think Rod Serling wrote 2/3 of them.
Well, before you go into that, I mean, like, because, the pilot after that was actually considered as the pilot episode was Where Is Everybody? That was kind of like that Adam and Eve story where Earl Holliman, who became like the top-on policewoman and everything and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people have seen that, and that was kind of like the first one that was released because, like you just said, it was kind of like the time on it was just probably like more of an example of what they could do. And as we've already talked about with Star Trek, it's like the menagerie or the cage, and and then Where No Man Has Gone Before wasn't it considered the first one for Star Trek. So yeah, it is that kind of thing of like, hey, there's an idea here, and we just have to retool it and stuff, and it was also kind of like, oh wow, this isolation, this 2-character story drama. It's just kind of like the quintessential Twilight Zone, isn't it? Because it's always about it starts in the middle of things. Every episode usually just starts in the middle of things where we are as lost as the characters. The characters are usually lost, psychologically or emotionally and everything. And then, we discover what they discover. And we're drawn in. It's like we're pulled along on that tether and everything. And we just want to know what's around the corner, what's around the bend, what's going to happen. And then he gives us like the big shock and reveal, which is classic. Because I think we also, whether it's the astronaut stories or the military stories or whatever, he always manages to kind of like to start with the character, and I think that helps with his opening narrations of the stories as well.
Sure,
way better than Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I gotta tell you that much. But so let's talk about some of those favorite, characters and storylines and everything, because you had picked out some picture elements and stuff. So
sure,
go ahead.
Well, I think it was the first season, Time Enough at Last, which
Time Enough at Last.
Time Enough at Last. It was with Burgess Meredith, and he plays this sort of meek librarian, right? And then there's a nuclear war, and nobody's left except for him, and all he ever cared about was just being by himself and reading books. And then, at the end, he says, now there's time enough at last to read all these books. There's time enough at last. Except he's,
Well, wait, he ends up on the steps of a library.
Right, yep.
So it's kind of like, oh my God, I'm in a library. Time enough at last. I'm surrounded by books. And then what happens?
And then he drops his reading glasses, and they break because they're made out of glass. And he can't read. He's blind as a bat.
It's like cruel. How cruel is fate?
Yeah, exactly. But for me right now, I've been thinking like that's like probably one of the few episodes right now I don't want to watch, considering what we're going through. You know what I mean? Because it's such a
apocalyptic.
It's apocalyptic to the nth degree because so much of us we're all isolated now, right? We're all isolating, so it's like that's the ultimate. Yes, it's the here's the little the little what's it called? Not the flip at the end, but
the twist.
The twist at the end, right? But the thing is, like, now is that what that thing is really about is that, like, the Burgess Meredith character, thought that's all he ever really wanted, but now he's truly alone. You know? And now that we're all kind of alone, somewhat to an extent, all of us, the reality is, I think, ultimately what that's saying is like, nah, man, Burgess, you don't really want to be alone with all those books.
Yeah. It's kind of like if the internet died on us tomorrow or tonight. We would be.
Don't say that.
I'm not predicting anything, bro. I'm just trying to say it's like that.
All of a sudden,
So going along those lines, there is also the idea of salvation and the twist of pulling that salvation away from you. And like, to me, that was kind of like what was the keynote to Serve Man. So like, you got like kind of like at the time where, we had the bombs and, all that kind of stuff going on. Man always looked to the stars, and, they were always looking for first contact. You know what I mean? So here was a story where, it's going to be first contact, but don't worry about it. They're friendly, and like, this was one of those great story element situations where it was about how do you crunch time in a story, right? You only got 29 minutes, whatever, to tell a story. And like with that particular one, he was able to kind of like extend, time. So like the guy was a linguist, right? Our lead character was a linguist. So he was hired to kind of like, hey, one of the aliens left around this book. It looks like it could be, important. So can you decipher it? It's kind of like that Amy Adams movie, The Arrival, isn't it? And so the guy spends supposedly months trying to decipher the book. But while he's doing it, in the background, we get clever writing where it was just enough to tell us the aliens were doing so much. They were curing cancer. They were, partying. They were really friendly. People were like going on ships and all that other kind of stuff. And so everybody was planning to go to the other place. This is going to be great. We're going to go visit the other place. And then it's like, even now our lead character's like, I'm not even booked for a couple of months. And they go on there, So in that time, he's trying to solve the riddle of the book. And so finally, his time is up. So we know, that's what I'm saying about clever writing. Finally, it's time to go and everything. And his secretary goes, wait a minute, stop. Right? She's trying to stop him while he's getting on the plane. This is so classic. While he's getting on the plane. And she's like, the book, it's a cookbook. Oh. And the aliens are just like, no, you're coming with us. It's like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Oh my God, it was amazing. This is Twilight Zone at its best.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty sure everybody has a favorite episode. And hopefully we want you, it's like a call to action. We want you out there to kind of like just write in your favorite episode, favorite moments, and everything like that. So you're hearing a couple of mine. Any other favorite moments that you have there, Dan?
Oh my God, there's so many. But I think with that episode too, if it's interesting when you start sort of thinking about that and put it back into context of even today, where like I think us as a society, meaning mankind in general, we're looking for that quick fix, right? Even now with the virus, when you have Trump a couple of weeks ago touting like, this pill's going to cure everybody tomorrow. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Now, there might be some truth to it, but I think that the reality is that like, so, I guess what Rod Serling's probably was saying is like, hey, there's the good part of, I think in general, there's the good part of man and there's the bad part of man, right? So the good part of man is that we have the ability to sort of solve all these problems ourselves, right? What's going on in the planet? Poverty and war and disease and the environment and all that stuff. But the thing is that people have a tendency. They want quick fixes. They want answers. We don't have patience as a species, and we also there's greed involved. There's just human nature of that greed part of us, and so I think here is where they show up and they the aliens in To Serve Man. They're offering up this insta solution to all our problems. We think, but guess what? It's like, no, guys, like, your hopes and dreams for that are have been washed away. I mean, that's an extreme case, but I think that in every Twilight Zone episode, I think Serling is trying to. There's a moral story in every episode. And it might be the morality. It might be morality of just human characters and the flaws we have, or the morality of society and the flaws it has, right? So there's always some kind of moral tale in there, even if it's buried deep. You can find.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I know. I wouldn't call it very deep. I would just call it like Boston clever, because like he was such a visualist that it wasn't in the words. It wasn't necessary in the words if he could show you visually. Like for example, Color of Night. Do you remember this one?
I probably, if you describe it,
was where there was like I believe like a black priest. And there was like it was like an old town, and it was a hanging that was going to take place, and and night fell, and it was getting darker and darker and darker, and stuff like that, and it was supposed to be an allegory towards racism and how the racism had infected this town and everything, and the only one who was spouting about peace and salvation was a black man who was of the cloth and stuff like that. But the people wouldn't let go of their racism, but they didn't like shout out expletives and all of this other kind of stuff. I mean, they had their anger and all that frustration, but you could tell that they were like, well, what's happening? What's going on? And it was something that maybe God didn't like, and so the night just kept getting darker and darker and everything. And that's where I just thought, it was like an amazing story in that aspect, because that's where the visual was enough to say something where you talk about morality and the morality plays and stuff like that. So that was a good example of that. But I mean, like, to me it's just like you had presented an idea which I think we're gonna probably take forward, where it's like you were saying, like, if you were to be teaching today, maybe not today, but you were suggesting that, like, like if you're teaching writers about how to write and to make films, or, so storytelling, you would use Twilight Zone as your prospectus and everything, So you said that you suggested that people should watch episodes of that to understand how to create a short film.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more?
Well, and also let's just put on top of that the series had some really good directors. I mean, they were able to go out and hire the best sort of directors from television back then, and they had some older school like Hollywood directors too, who worked on it. But like Richard Donner, when he was a younger director, worked on, I think I counted 6 episodes in the last season. So you have to sort of look at the combination of at the end of the day, it was so much of Rod Serling's vision, and and the scripts that he and the others wrote, like Richard Matheson, right? But that because the scripts were so good, they could attract good directors, and that they seem to sort of have enough of a budget so that even though when you look at the special effects today and stuff like that, they don't look cheap. There's a quality about them across the board with everything, and also
that quality was practical quality as well. So they used, like you just said, it's black and white. It was practical. Pure drama was in the storytelling. Really,
absolutely. And I think that what these scripts do, so you got to figure without not including the commercial breaks, it's a 25-minute story, right? And maybe if you take out the actual titles and the opening of Serling, which is usually about 45 seconds to a minute, so maybe they're 22 or 23 minutes, but they're like that sort of length seems to be like almost a perfect length for a short film, from an attention span for people in general and for the storytelling aspect of it, right? And what Serling was able to accomplish, and the other writers were able to accomplish in most of the episodes. I mean, there were some episodes that were duds, like every series, right? But not many compared to other series. But
there's too many that weren't that. The duds don't really like matter in that aspect,
right?
They're few and far in between.
Yeah. So, but what they were able to do is they were able to, in a very short amount of time, tell a very precise, tight story that usually had a twist, had some kind of morality, moral tale, moral part to it without being preachy. And they were also you were able to understand who the main characters were. You can't fully develop a character in 20 minutes, but they were able to like, okay, this is this person's flaw, or this is a person's Achilles heel, which is probably the same thing, or this is the person's motivation for X, Y, or Z. They're greedy, or they're scared, or they're paranoid, or they're, or they live in a fantasy world, or whatever it is. So he just find that one thing and like perfectly tune it to what the story was.
I think what worked is because of the narration. There were a lot of stories. Most of the stories ended without an ending. It was kind of like, this is the comeuppance moment. And then his voiceover comes in and says, and that is what happened to Sally Jane. As the devil disguised as Robert Redford takes her off to where. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or like the couple that had the drunken night out and are like running around a town, and they're actually running around a little girl's dollhouse. And so here's the big giant hand, and it's like, what? And stuff. So it's kind of like so I think it just was like, let me just take one character. I'm going to focus on this one character, put them in the middle of things, share enough with you so that way you know what their goal is, and then hit them. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. And that's where, like the hitchhiker, going my way, and all of that. It's like the girl is already dead, but she doesn't believe it. She doesn't want to believe it. She thinks she's got to get somewhere, and she's traveling and traveling and traveling, and she keeps seeing the hitchhiker on the road. And the hitchhiker is really just like, I'm the angel, come to take you. Oh my God, I always get these chills every time I talk about something scary.
Yeah.
Because that was the scary thing for me, And let's talk about the fear factor of Twilight Zone, because I mean, this was a television show, but I was way too young to be watching. But in that aspect is the fright factor of Twilight Zone. It always shot you. I mean, Eye of the Beholder, where the woman wants to be beautiful and everybody's all ugly. Their faces are hidden until the end where we get the reveal. I mean, come on, man. You're not giving me a specific example. I want to know what scared you from the Twilight Zone.
Oh, man. Jesus. It's hard for me to, it's hard for me to pull out. I think you're better at pulling out those specific moments than I am.
Dude, it's so vivid in my memory.
But you know what? We could talk about Nightmare from 20,000 Feet. Because, and I think that's definitely much more of a straight out, more horror film, sort of horror feel than the other ones. You know what I mean? And it just was all about like a man paranoid, and
fear of flying.
Fear of flying, but also just in general, like probably if anything else, that was more about like, if you let paranoia and fear just take over your life, that's what's going to happen. And was the gremlin really there or not? Who really knows? We don't know. Although, you can sort of see the damage on the wing afterwards, right?
The damage on the wing afterwards.
So, and, when they redid it with John Lithgow in Twilight Zone, the movie, obviously that they were able to sort of, back in the Shatner episode, the guy was just running around in a big old, like, bad ape suit, And
I love that. I love that bear suit because it came back to bite you in the ass when we had The Shining. Don't you remember that scene with the guy in the bear suit in The Shining?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where I go with that. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think that there's also for me, especially growing up, I think because we grew up at the tail end of the Cold War, so we always had that kind of specter of like the button to get pushed at any time. It was I think it was the nuclear war episodes that always kind of freaked me out because it was that was a real possibility. I think I think it was the possibility of the real fear out there. More than anything else for me. But
society gone wild with like Monsters on Maple Street, conspiracy and fear and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, either way, it's like coming down like to time now. But it's just that like I just love sharing stories around the Twilight Zone, and it's something where I think that I would love doing something more on that, maybe at another time.
Well, but I did want to
also love for people to kind of like to share,
sure,
their favorite episodes, because you can continue to, communicate even after you watch the show and stuff like that, to share about your experiences with the Twilight Zone. So I'm talking to the audience out there.
Sure, no, I understand. And what I did want to say is, and getting back just to watching it to inspire people who want to make short films, I think it's a great thing for people who want to make, especially if they want to make science fiction or fantasy or horror or thriller kind of short films. I think that I don't know it. Again, it can play a straight out drama or comedy too, just more from a structural point of view. Although I would kind of feel that if you're a filmmaker and you just want to do a straight out drama, it's probably harder to kind of pull off, sort of a zone kind of feel or even a zone kind of structure, just because it played so well within the genre, the confines of those genres, And I also think that's why Twilight Zone also was so popular, it influenced so many genre filmmakers across the board for a couple generations, because it did sort of touch into the thriller, the horror, the science fiction, the fantasy elements across the board, and it did it like kind of seamlessly, just like effortlessly is maybe the better word, And also the other thing, like I said to you before we go, Chase, what's fascinating about Rod Serling and makes him kind of so unique as well as a writer is that he dictated every script was dictated. He didn't actually physically write it.
Oh yeah.
And I find that fascinating that it literally was, people sort of have to like, it comes out like through the typing, but he was able to sort of like just, do the scenes and do the dialogue and all came flowing out of his mouth. And that's really rare, I think. Then he had somebody type up the scripts for him.
That's what happens when you are, that cool that you can just sitting around going, Asteria night. You know what I mean? Come on, let's be real about it. I mean, we all wish we were that kind of writer, and everything. But either way you look at it, is that, I mean, this has still been an excellent, journey with you there, Jan, because I love these conversations because it takes me back, to a simpler time, simpler age, and everything else like that. And I just hope that people can feel that when we are talking about it is that, if they carry on the conversation, it will build that expectation for them as well and everything. And, eventually we can make it be that we'll have a chat role and people can actually talk to us. No, that's only if we were live. But you know what I'm saying. We can always look back at what people put up on there and comment on. But either way is, thanks a lot, Dan. And you know what? I think the best way to end this is because you were talking about Twilight Zone, the movie, is I could say to you, do you want to see something really scary?
Sure.
Well, you remember the line, though, right? Oh, okay. I'm not going to kiss you. But either way, I'm Chief Johnson. This is Dan Halperin. You're watching The Essentials and our exploration of the Twilight Zone. And then we are out of here.